Hey guys, welcome in. In this video, we are going to focus on the second movement of Beethoven's Pastoral Sonata. And there's honestly lots of really cool things about this piano sonata, but we're going to focus our attention on three main areas. The first one is the cool texture at the beginning of the piece. Also, this piece is like a masterclass in 2-5-1, how to use a simple 2-5-1 progression, but then flesh it out and do cool stuff with it. And the third thing, of course, is the fact that this is one of Beethoven's jazz movements, like where Beethoven invents some early 1800 jazz, and we're going to check out how he does it in this piece. So let's jump in. Now, as promised, we're going to start out here looking at the texture of the first section. And it's actually pretty cool. We start out here with a 3-note chord, going to another 3-note chord, going to another 3-note chord, the top note moves, then 3-note chord, 3-note chord, 3-note chord, 3-note chord, 3-note chord, 3-note chord, 3-note chord. On the bottom, we have this staccato bass. So not only is there bass, not only is it jumping with a lot more activity than the top parts. You notice the top part mostly quarter notes, eighth notes, slow moving things, and the bottom is quicker and it's staccato. We actually refer to this as string quartet texture on the piano. Now, not the only texture string quartets use. Obviously, if you play in a string quartet, you're like, we do lots of different textures, but we call the string quartet texture because you could imagine the top three voices were three parts of the string quartet, so three higher strings, and the bottom is the cello going. Now, obviously, if you actually had four different individuals playing four different instruments, it would be a lot easier to play the different articulations in the top part and the bottom part. But as a piano player, we really run into two big problems here. The main one, I think, is pretty obvious. We have to somehow connect these top notes, and we can't just use the pedal. We can't just stick the pedal down. If it was right hand by itself, we could. We could just use the pedal, and every time we had a 3-note chord going to a different 3-note chord, we could just use the pedal. You only have 5 fingers on each hand, so it's very hard to go from 3 notes to a different 3-note chord smoothly. So you could just use the pedal, but because you have to also do this, you can't use the pedal. The other big issue we run into is that my pedal is breaking. So if you hear random notes that are not staccato, that's because it doesn't always lift. So support the channel, send a super chat, check out the Patreon page so Ryan can buy a new pedal or a new keyboard. Now, even though I just told you that the pedal doesn't really help you because you can't stick the pedal down once per right hand chord because you'd blur the left hand together, check out the end of measure 2 into the end of measure 3, and you can actually use your pedal to help if you want to. So for example, you could play this, and then your foot go down, move to your new place, lift when you play beat 1, and then go back down after your left hand lifts, get your new chord, go down, back up, go down, back up. So you actually can kind of use these quick little pedal impulses to connect little tiny moments of the right hand that you literally can't reach if you really want to. You could also just do really good finger staccato and get it as smooth as you can when you need to. Those are kind of the options you are left with, but this isn't all negative thing. Like the texture you create is really cool. It's an awesome sound. It's one of the first things that drew me in when I heard this piece. I just want to point out some of the practical problems of pulling it off. That's why we often call it string quartet texture, to kind of say, hey, by the way, 4 people ideally could do this really well, and I'm doing it on my own, so give me a little grace. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about chords. Now, we are by no means going to analyze every single chord in this piece. I just want to point out how Beethoven uses the 2-5-1 progression, that simple 2-5-1 progression, and kind of builds a lot of this piece out of that simple progression. In case you don't know, 2 chords want to go to 5 chords, and 5 chords want to go to 1 chord. This whole piece will make a lot more sense if you know that 2 chord wants to go to 5, wants to go to 1. That's one of our basic progressions of music, 2-5-1, 2-5-1. So when you hear a 2, especially a 2-7, we really want to go to 5-7. When you hear a 5-7, you really want to go to 1. So at the beginning here, first 3 chords are just 1, 5, 1. And then 1, and check this out. Here's our first 2-7 chord. It's a 2 half diminished 7th chord, which you might think is weird because E, G, B flat's a diminished chord, and the 7th on top though is not. a fully diminished seventh chord. It's just a half diminished seventh chord. It's actually not weird. We're in a minor key. Your 2 chord should be a half diminished seventh chord. So far, nothing weird has happened. We have a 2 chord. This is our first kind of shocker. Now, if you've been around the channel, I've told you many times before that if you have a 1 chord, D minor in this case, D, F, A, but it's over the 5. If a 1 chord is over the 5, it takes on the nature of the 5 chord most of the time. We expect it to really be a 5 chord. But in this case, that's not the best way to think of this chord. It is a 1 chord, but 2 shouldn't go to 1. We actually call this a prolongation. Like prolong means to make something last for longer. Here's a 2 chord. Here's our 1 chord with A in the bass, so our 5 in the bass. But we go right back to another 2 chord. What this is we are just passing through these notes. The left hand literally goes. So 2 chord, 2 chord. The right hand goes. Both notes of a 2 chord. Both notes of a 2 chord. All notes of a 2 chord. So this is just prolonging the 2 chord. We're going 2, still 2. Now 2 wants to go to 5-7. We haven't gone to a good 5-7 yet. But we get this chord first. This is a G sharp, B, D, F. Now, I always tell you, get used to seeing fully diminished 7th chords. If you like Beethoven, they're everywhere. You know it's a fully diminished 7th chord because it's every 3 half steps. Fully diminished 7th chords are symmetrical chords. You could go forever until you ran out of notes and went on for infinity. But that's a fully diminished 7th chord. And you always have to ask yourself, how did Beethoven spell it? Which fully diminished 7th chord is it? Because it's symmetrical. If you just look at the piano, it could be G sharp, it could be B, it could be D, it could be F. And now when you spell a chord, you always expect it, just assume by default, okay, the word always is a dangerous word, but always assume it's going to be spelt by thirds. So if it was a D fully diminished 7th chord, it would be D, F. What note is a third above F? A. So that's A flat, C flat. If it was an F, it would be F, A flat, C flat. You don't want to know. E double flat. E double flat's scary. If it was a B, it would be B, D, F, A flat. But this is spelled G sharp. So the only way to get the thirds to stack up in a normal order would be G, B, D, F. G sharp, B, D, F. Fully diminished 7th chords, 90% of the time, will just resolve up by half step. So that G sharp wants to go up by half step. What's a half step above G sharp? An A. So our 2 chord didn't go to a 5 chord. Our 2 chord that got prolonged should go to 5. Instead, it goes to a G sharp fully diminished 7th chord. G sharp wants to go to A. A is 5. So Beethoven is adding fuel to the fire. He's like, this chord wants to go here, but also I've prolonged it. Now it really wants to go here, but now we're going to add in a fully diminished 7th chord. Now it really wants to go to A, but then Beethoven has one more trick for you. Ooh, this is the chord we just talked about a second ago. It's a 1 chord, a D minor chord, but 5 is in the bass. So if you get a 1 chord with 5 in the bass, it almost always, except when we just saw it a second ago, almost always takes on the nature of a 5 chord. And that's what's going on here. This is really a 5 chord. And then it goes to a real 5 chord. So 1 chord, 1, 6, 4, 1 chord, but takes on the nature of the dominant, to a real 5 chord. So this whole first progression is driving to our 5 chord. We get 1 chord, 5, back to 1. Okay, here we go. 2, stay on 2. We prolonged it. Really need to go to A. And we really need to go to A. We get there now. Okay, once without me talking, just so you can kind of hear the progression. And you can even hear one little trick in the dynamics as Beethoven says crescendo, which makes sense because we're going, then right here Beethoven goes trick, which is actually a common thing in this piece. Now, we're going to spend the most time on that part because I'm going to show you now how that starts to happen a lot. Next section, we just go directly to the key of F. F is not an uncommon key. It's a key of 3 in D minor, so we kind of expect it. 5, 1. Ooh, another weird chord. B, D, F, A natural. So B, D, F is a diminished chord, and A natural is our minor 7th. It's not diminished 7. It's not fully diminished. It's a half diminished 7th chord. And I just told you a little bit ago, when you see a half diminished 7th chord, often it's the 2 chord in a minor key. Well, B would be the 2 chord in which key? B would be the 2nd chord in the key of A minor. So B, half diminished 7, 2 chord, going to an A minor chord to an E chord. So if we're in the key of A minor is 1, E7 is 5. So once again, we have our 1 chord, but E is in the bass, so it really takes on the nature of a 5 chord, going to a 5 chord. So the first thing here before the repeat is in the key of 1, the key of D minor, 2, 5, try the key of F. Oh, sorry. Then A minor, 2 chord, 5 chord, then 1 chord. Now, a second ago, I mentioned the idea of prolonging a chord, like our 2 chord. This is also a 2 chord. So we can pass through a chord in the middle. All we do is really trade off the B flat and the G for the G and the B flat. And we've prolonged a 2 chord. Well, the next section here is like one gigantic prolonged A7 chord. Other things are going on, but we're really just sliding around different A7 chords. I mean, all this section can be understood as 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, which sort of makes sense. Our first section was D minor. We went to F. We kind of went to the key of A minor. Now we're going to turn A minor into a 7 chord. Well, A7 should go to the key of D minor, which is our original key for the piece. So it makes a lot of sense that we prolong A7. We're hanging out on A7, hanging out on A7, and eventually we get still A7, still A7, resolve. Now, we are almost ready to talk about everybody's favorite part, the jazz section. But before we get there and make it jazzy, I'm just going to analyze chords for you. So here's a section in D major chord, 1 chord, pretty obvious. Oh, E minor 7. What's an E minor 7, the key of D? It's just a 2 chord. Well, where should 2 chords go? 5, 7. Where should 5, 7 go? 1. So this section, just the chords. 1, 2, 5, 1. And then even 1. Kind of a 2 chord again. It's another E7. But we throw in a G sharp, so it kind of becomes a 5 chord of A. But that's kind of what 2 chords do. 2 chords, minor 2 7 chords, one to go to the key of 5, one to go to a 5 chord. But then if you make that third, G sharp in this case, it wants to go to 5 even more. And I mentioned that because at the end of the piece, one last cool thing with chords, the final time we play our melody, it's very bare bones. Except, remember our 2 chord that got prolonged earlier? Now we're going to prolong it even more. Those are all just 2 chords passing in the middle with. And then we say, well, let's make that 2 chord into the dominant 7, the 5 of 5 version of it, just like we had earlier. So in a sense, we have 2 prolonged for 2 measures, and then we're going to say, well, let's turn that 2 chord into a 5/5 and prolong that for 2 measures. So you can kind of see Beethoven's trick of just doing a lot of 1/5, 1/5, 1/5, 2/5, 1, 2/5, 1s, but then prolonging some of the 2s, prolonging some of the 5s, and making an entire composition out of not too crazy of chord structure. Okay, now let's go back to our second section and talk about the moment you've all been waiting for. Some good, old-fashioned Beethoven jazz. Now, there are several things that make this sound jazzy to our ears. One of them is obviously just the triplet, but then also the slide on top, or the apparent slide on top. But I want to make you aware that within this measure, there's actually a few interpretation issues, and kind of whatever you decide about them, it still ends up sounding pretty jazzy. But the first issue is actually with that grace note or appoggiatura or slide, because it's actually not. Beethoven didn't write it as a small grace note. The reason is, in this time period, if he would have written that as a grace note, there's a good chance that we would normalize it. We would put it on the beat and then make it take an equal rhythmic value with the note of and the note after it, which you might say it's crazy, but just think of Mozart for a second. We would never put it before the beat like this. We either play like this, or so we put it on the beat and normalize it, make it the same rhythmic speed as what comes after it. Or we might play it on the beat but make it slightly faster like. Either way, we probably would not go. So if Beethoven wrote a grace note, we might all be doing, which again, still sounds kind of jazzy. But that would definitely be wrong. Beethoven did not say to put that on the beat, and that's what a grace note or appoggiatura might have implied. So Beethoven wrote it as a 32nd note and wrote out the rest. But there is another actually deeper issue with this where we don't know exactly how long to hold that 32nd note. And you might say, well, it's obvious. Just learn how to count, right? It probably is a literal 32nd note. It probably is. But this is a really good educational point where when you end up this issue actually a lot in this era and earlier eras, when there are rests involved, it was not normal of them to write an 8th note rest and then say this note is a 16th note and then say beam that together or mark it together, and those are all triplets. That was not a common notation in this time period. So we actually end up with this problem of there are many times in tripletty pieces where composers will still write a 16th note, and we kind of say, yeah, but it's a pickup note, and they never ever wrote this notation of writing like quarter note triplet rest tied to 8th note triplet. So we often just kind of normalize those 16th notes into the triplet feel. If that was the case with this note, we would get this, which still sounds jazzy. So if you ever heard someone do that before, they might actually be doing it intentionally. Now, that raises another question. If you do that, what are you going to do with beat 1? Are you going to do this? Or are you going to go? That one's a little tougher to justify. I probably would play that one rhythmically. As Beethoven said it, long, short, long, really short, long, not like tripletty. I personally think that goes a little too far. Beethoven could have written, because there's no rest involved in that beat, he could have written it with the triplet, even though that's still a rare marking. But there is a little bit of argument to be had in that case too. So like I said, there's actually a lot of fascinating things you can learn about music history and what notations were available to composers at the time they wrote their pieces through just this simple measure. So what I end up with doing, if you want to be like me, don't listen to anyone famous play piano. Just, listen to my advice. I feel like that one I really want to be crisp. I don't want it to be triplets. I like it crisp. Then I like this crisp. So I played faster. But if someone wanted to do this, It's actually not the wildest thing, again, because of those notation issues I mentioned a second ago. But the safest way to do it, if you just want to know that answer, would definitely be. And that idea of safe and tradition is a whole nother discussion to have another time. Like, there are literally Mozart sonatas with grace notes where everyone plays them a certain way, and people think you're definitely wrong if you do it differently than everyone does it. But there's another sonata with the exact same notation, and just because everyone's used to be played a different way, everyone make fun of you if you do it the opposite way. So that's another discussion to be had another time. Just know there is an issue. There are options, and it actually is really interesting. If you try to dive into answering just a simple question like that, it's really difficult to get to the bottom of. Beethoven never got around to recording this sonata, so it's hard to know for sure. Now, I would not be doing this piece justice if we didn't get to the second jazz section. So we just now played some happy jazz with some fun slides that aren't really slides, as you now know. And now we're ready for some cool jazz. Now, some people say you really have to swing this section and slow it down for it to sound like jazz. Something like. But I actually think just like straight tempo sounds really jazzy with the. Definitely a different style of jazz, not just like swing, obviously, but still has that kind of cool, chill jazz kind of vibe. Now, if you've been around the channel much before, you already know that I love this sonata. I wish it was way, way more popular. It has an awesome first movement. This second movement here is such a cool, unique one. The third movement's also really, really special and unique. And the fourth movement's a lot of fun. So at the end of this video, I would say watch some of my other videos. Obviously, that would be my top preference. But if you also just want to sit back, relax while you go work or next time you do school or you study, just put on this sonata. Just enjoy it. It is a really, really special piece. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned a few things on the way. I'll see you guys in the next one.